How you doing, folks? Today what we have here is a review of the first film in an expansive cinematic universe, Iron Man. As I'm recording this, there are more than 13 films out with more on the way, which might not have been possible without this movie being at least somewhat successful. At the time it came out, it was a sleeper hit because the general public was not as familiar with Iron Man. And interestingly enough, the crew working on this movie discussed Iron Man with focus groups to try and discover their preconceived notions and potential interests with the character. This film's financial success might also be attributed to the fact that there was superhero movie hype around Iron Man's release due to The Dark Knight coming out a month after it. The Dark Knight's trailers probably contributed to building hype for the superhero movie genre as well. Now, this review will contain spoilers, and I don't want to step around them and give a non-spoiler review. However, I will tell you without spoilers that I recommend this movie. To be fair, I'd probably say that I'd recommend any film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because each one is at least a decent piece, but as far as how important this movie is to see compared to the other Marvel Studios movies, this one is one of the more important ones, not only because of the solid story, but also for its introduction to Tony Stark and Iron Man, as well as the beginnings of the cinematic universe. The film begins with Tony being kidnapped by terrorists and forced to build the deadly Jericho missile. Tony was in Afghanistan demoing the missile for the US military in the first place. We also get a couple scenes interspersed between the early scenes in Afghanistan, which introduce us to this new take on Tony Stark by developing his personality, like his arrogance, irresponsibility, and some of his morality. We see he's got more of a sense of humor than Tony Stark did in the comics, but it also tells us about his background, like what his job is and some personal information. While imprisoned by the terrorists, another prisoner, Jensen, saves Tony from a shrapnel injury inflicted by a Stark Industries weapon that the terrorists were using against him. And Jensen helps build Tony the mini arc reactor to power the first Iron Man suit and escape, while also providing Tony with perspective about the consequences of his business's practices. Then they escape, with Jensen making a slightly contrived self-sacrifice. The guard of Tony and Jensen's cell speaks to them in Turkish and can't get a good response, so the guard busts in there. But why is the guard speaking Turkish in the first place? Shouldn't they know what the common language is of Tony and Jensen? Anyway, Tony gets back to America and has some great banter between Obadiah Stane, or I guess the actors Jeff Bridges and Robert Downey Jr. really have good chemistry together.
Look at you. Oh, burger, you had to have a burger.
Well, come on.
You get me one of those?
And Tony calls a press conference announcing that he's shutting down the weapons division of Stark Industries. Initially, he believes his weapons and his being a merchant of death, as a reporter puts it, were necessary evils to ensure protection, and after escaping the cave, he questions the morality and accountability of his company and the people that get access to his weapons. There's a nice line of dialogue that Tony has at the press conference about what his father would think about the state of the company, and Tony's concern about if the consequences of the company's sales have always been this destructive, which is a nice seed and establishes the chip Tony has on his shoulder from his father, and this develops more throughout the future films, so it's neat to see the beginnings of that emotional thread. Now you know that I know how it culminates. But anyway, not knowing who to trust, Tony shuts down the weapons production and would rather focus on arc reactor technology and other forms of sustainable energy. Tony trusts himself with the Stark weapons and that he will not abuse them, so with the weapons in his hands, like an Iron Man suit, good will come out of it. That is essentially the core of Tony's character's philosophy in these Marvel Cinematic Universe films. If he's in control of the power, then everything will be okay. And, of course that gets challenged constantly in every film, if he is capable or if he should be in control of that power. Tony discovers that his weapons are still being secretly sold to terrorists, and that a village in Golmira is at their mercy. The scene with the terrorists in Golmira goes to a pretty dark place. Like the terrorists are ruthlessly executing people. So Tony liberates the village and destroys the Jericho missiles by using his Iron Man suit, taking responsibility for the abuse of his inventions. Not only for the terrorists' abuse of the weapons, but also for his company's unethical distribution, and for himself because he was naive about the potential abuse of his creations. Now, flying into another country and killing a bunch of people who your own country is at war with is an act of warfare, even if they are terrorists. So, on Iron Man's exit, he's intercepted by the Air Force. The liaison between the military and Stark Industries, Rhodey, who is also a good friend of Tony's, is suspicious of a high-tech thing destroying terrorists' Stark weapons and grills Tony for information, which eventually leads him to figuring out that Tony is Iron Man. Now, while on the topic of Rhodey, I think that I should take a minute to discuss the role of Tony's friends. So we've got Rhodey and Pepper, both of which pick up the slack for Tony's irresponsibility and selfishness. Rhodey feels disrespected and that Tony strains their friendship by Rhodey having to deal with Tony's nonsense, and that Rhodey's job as a liaison can end up making him feel more like a babysitter. Now, Pepper is Tony's personal assistant and helps keep a schedule for him, run the company, and deal with some of his personal matters. Pepper's character could have easily become nagging and two-dimensional and unlikable, but I don't think she ever nags him, and instead she's non-judgmental and understanding, but still disapproves of his selfishness at times, which helps guide Tony into a better emotional place, at least. Anyway, back to the story. It's revealed that Stain, the company vice president, hired the terrorist group known as the Ten Rings, nice name dropped there, to kill Tony Stark in exchange for an off-the-books Jericho missile. Stain feels entitled to ownership and the direction of the company, which he justifies from essentially building the company up. The Ten Rings give Stain the first Iron Man suit from the cave, hoping that they will one day get a couple suits for themselves, but Stain double-crosses them, taking the suit, and has his soldiers kill the terrorists. Meanwhile, Tony knows more of his weapons have been secretly distributed, so he has Pepper go to his office and get the secret files with the locations of where the other Stark weapons went. Pepper also digs up Stain's Ironmonger suit designs in the secret files. Stain finds out that all his secret files have been copied and knows that he's going to be found out. So Stain starts to take action and prepares his Ironmonger suit. However, Stain's scientists and engineers aren't capable of recreating the mini-arc reactor, so he takes the one out of Tony's chest and uses that to power his own suit. But why does he need the reactor now? Killing Tony Stark right now makes no sense. The murder would probably get traced back to him. He's got evidence against him of unapproved Stark Industries weapons sales to terrorists. I guess his name was somehow attached to it because those files were enough to convince S.H.I.E.L.D. of his arrest. So Stain uses his Ironmonger suit to protect himself from the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and Pepper is, brought along with the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents because, the director thought she needed more to do, which I disagree with. She's already been of benefit. She will only be a vulnerability to her allies in a fight. The issue is, what does Stain achieve by putting up a fight? He won't clear his name. That info has already been passed on to S.H.I.E.L.D. He's not the berserker type of villain. He's very calculating, and he doesn't seem like he would retaliate vengefully like that. The scene seems kind of tacked on to have a climactic fight scene between the hero and villain, which admittedly is still really fun to watch. Of course, when a fight between two robots breaks out in the city, the world looks at Stark for an explanation, as he's the only person capable of having access to this sort of technology. S.H.I.E.L.D. prepares a cover story for the incident. I love the inclusion of S.H.I.E.L.D., by the way. It's subtle and a cool connection to the comics. Their involvement in the story makes sense, but isn't intrusive to the movie. Tony scraps the cover story and reveals that he is Iron Man, which makes for a great ending line. It was kind of cheesy in the early comics to have Iron Man posing as Tony Stark's bodyguard, and after, the Stan Lee era, they did away with that, so I like this decision. Then there's a post-credit scene which introduces Nick Fury and alludes to a comic book movie universe in the Avengers, which creates something to look forward to with these movies. I actually didn't know about this end credit scene until someone told me. I did know about the Avengers movie because I was on Wikipedia one day, and I saw it listed as being in development, which I thought sounded good because at the time the Avengers were my favorite, but I didn't know that there was any evidence of it in Iron Man, so the next time I watched it, made sure to check for that scene. Overall, this movie is really good. The characters are likable and have understandable motivations. The drama, comedy, action, and sci-fi are well balanced. Tony Stark is introduced to the big screen as an interesting character, with Robert Downey Jr.'s take different and unique from other superheroes we've seen before in cinema, but also with a worthwhile character arc about protecting the people that he was inadvertently putting in danger. This movie works on a lot of different levels. The drama and comedy works and can be poignant. The action is fun and intense. It's also got some worthwhile and sometimes dark sci-fi ideas in it. This movie set that kind of tone and standard for the following Marvel films to work on a number of different levels, where a person that likes movies will be pleased, as well as the fans. And this movie is some good quality entertainment that you can show to kids, at an appropriate age, of course. Which is great because kids love superheroes, but stuff like Christopher Nolan's Batman might be too dark for some. The only one really glaring error is that climactic fight at the end feeling a little out of character for the villain, and it just being there because a superhero movie needs a big fight with the villain at the end. But with all this considered, I give Iron Man a 4.5 out of 5.